The growth of our region is historically tied to its location and avenues of transportation, combined with leaders who are proactive and visionary. Building the Union Center Boulevard interchange was no exception. The location, perfectly placed between Cincinnati and Dayton and tied to one of the busiest interstates in the nation, was land waiting for the vision of community leaders, determined to make things happen. 20 years later, we recognize the impact Union Center Boulevard has had and still has on the growth of Westchester, Liberty, and our region.
I moved into this area 49 years ago as an engineer from General Electric. People in my office said, "Westchester? Where is that?" And I just had a feeling about it, and my answer was, someday you'll know.
I've got some maps starting in 1955. Every 7 years, the government comes through and makes new maps. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to see what's happening when you have the maps laying out there. Everything's closing in on this big black hole down here. So that gives us a little incentive to say, hey, let's do something about that.
There has been studies back as early as 1969, 1970 for an interchange at Allen Road. Obviously, we had 3,000 to 5,000 vacant acres of industrially zoned property in that location, and there has to be an access for that for business to want to locate there.
Well, it was simple. If we wanted to create a great city, because when you have great cities or great areas, you can charge more for your land. It was strictly business.
I ran for trustee in '91. And at that time, one reason I ran was we had a very divided community. We had pro-business, anti-business.
We had a lot of opposition internally and externally to the interchange. The township trustees at the time and Larry Schumacher decided, however, that they wanted to get this thing done no matter what.
Very difficult to get together the funds, all the resources needed in order to put in the interchange.
There was some faith that we could come up with the funding locally to build Union Center.
The first thing we needed to do was change the name of the community to Westchester. That was sort of the first thing that happened. And the way we got that done is we just started using the name. We put it on all the police cars and the fire trucks.
There was no place for the interchange to exit onto. Those were soybean fields and pastures, and there was nothing there.
Community leaders saw how acres of farmland that once grew crops could one day harvest jobs. They envisioned an interchange that would become the focal point for business in the Cincinnati-Dayton corridor.
The trustees at the time, in the early 90s, decided that we had already put in place land use planning. We had control of our own zoning. We needed to work on a vision. What did we want to become? And so they empowered 20 or so of us, private citizens, to get together and to brainstorm with a facilitator to come up and dream a vision of where we wanted to be in 20 years.
The original 2012 in 1992, 2020 actually, but 2012 was 20 years out. Vision Committee was to go from 35% business tax base, 65% residential, to 65% business, 35% residential. We made a presentation. The chamber was the host of it, and there was a presentation. I think it was in 1993, as part of our vision. The township had done their vision committee and the vision stuff, and come up with the need and the thought of putting an interchange in this area and opening up this 2,000 or 3,000 acres for jobs, for economic development. It was the first new interchange in Southwest Ohio in 25 years. There was immediately people coming in wanting to buy 100 acres of it and do things that weren't part of the original vision and belief of what we could build here.
If it became a fast food mecca, God forbid a truck stop or something else, we would lose our whole reason for doing this.
Where the Marriott Hotel is could have easily been a tire store or some big box and so on and so forth, and we chose all of the early enterprises to go in that vicinity based on what they would do for the overall eventually.
Dave Gully and the trustees challenged us to develop a community improvement corporation, which we formed in the mid-90s, and again a public-private partnership to attract the best businesses, to market the area. This was an advocacy group for good businesses that we would get questions answered very quickly. We would brand Westchester as a user-friendly area.
The aspect I was most involved with was getting people at the state level interested in the project from an economic development standpoint. Had we allowed ODOT to build the interchange under their typical profile, it would have probably taken 15 years instead of 3.
The Butler County Transportation Improvement District was established just prior to the Union Center construction. Authorized by the Ohio General Assembly to be used for the construction of Union Center and the Hamilton Connector, now known as State Route 129, the TID was formed by Butler County Commissioners in January of '94.
TID was an idea that was born of frustration, but it became kind of a model for the country and was recognized all over the country as far as it being an effective vehicle for accelerating the building and construction of major projects.
The TID was developed for these two projects, for Union Center and for the 129 connector.
Now that both the private sector and the newly formed TID could work together to improve public roads, the TID brought all interested parties to the table to propose improvements.
Now we have to come up with local money to build the Union Center Boulevard interchange. And that's where Larry Schumacher, in conjunction with our development partner, Westchester 75, said, okay, we'll figure out a way to do it. And Larry said, okay, I'll finance it. As part of our commitment, we will build the connecting roads.
Schumacher Dugan, up to that point, had only invested in roads and infrastructure within our own industrial parks, where obviously we got our return on our investment by selling land and building buildings on it. In this case, we were building 5-lane highways through property that we didn't own. I committed about $5 million, not even having the $5 million, as a matter of fact. And I owned 50 acres of about 1,000 acres that were to be improved. Obviously, when you invest money that you don't have, that does have a tendency to keep you up nights.
We came up with the idea of a thoroughfare system where we have the Hamilton Connector, we have Allen Road interchange, and we have 747 improved to 4 lanes, and now we've got a system of moving traffic that helps take traffic off of the 275, I-75 corridors and move the cars and the people around. And that's what we sold to the state.
North-south corridors, we had plenty of. We didn't have any east-west corridors. North-south, we had Cincinnati-Dayton Road, we had 747, we had Bypass 4, we had Route 4. The other direction, east-west, was a bunch of farm roads. And so Union Center became the connector for all these north-south corridors.
We were fortunate to have good people do good things at the right time throughout the process, and the vehicle that brought them all together, the umbrella that they worked under, was the TID vehicle.
Transportation Improvement District was a organization outside of the control of the county engineer that could advance the project through the necessary steps with ODOT and OKI.
We had an engineer go out and he looked around, he saw the power lines, he saw the topography, he saw some, I don't know, weird buffalo grass or whatever it was, and said, don't build it here, they'll kill you on the environmental. And then he looked down and went over and says, he pointed the direction of where it is now, said, that's all great land, you'll have no environmental issues. That was all done in the course of just a few hours, what would have taken ODOT about 2 years to do. And TID was empowered to do those things.
We made our normal inquiries with the state and the federal government. What does it take to put an interchange on the interstate? And we were told that it was impossible. You're not allowed to do this. It can't be done. We won't permit it. All the usual, don't ask us. The purpose of I-75 is to commute traffic from Detroit to Florida. And the fewer interchanges we have on I-75, the more efficient that process is.
For the first time, Butler County spoke with one voice in Columbus and said, this is what we want. That's where we got their attention.
We had to go through a variety of approval processes that everybody told us would be impossible to do, but we did it anyway.
I know, speaking to some of the ODOT folks, they were convinced that we would fall on our face, that they really thought they were the only ones that could build major projects.
During the federal process, we're at least 5 years out just in the planning stages. That's before you start any construction. This was accomplished somewhere in about 14 months.
The state is now using a lot of the things we did as their standard. All kinds of things that we did were first. We were having meetings with the Federal Highway Administration, with the ODOT, the state people, the local people, every week. And Dave Gottlieb sat in those meetings, and if there were questions, rather than moving paper, we just looked across the table and said, what do you think about if we did it this way?
We actually took a room in the township building and created what we called the war room. We had our maps and our pictures and all the stuff on the wall. And we began meeting and started down the process for doing all the things that you need to do to get an interchange approved.
They were putting together a 5-year plan, and no project that wasn't on the TIP, the Transportation Improvement Plan at OKI, could be built.
We went through a process of going to their meetings and lobbying them to put this on the TIP and getting them to approve it, and they obviously were in opposition to it. There was a lot of struggles. Mike Fox would go down and just create havoc at their meetings, and it was quite a spectacle. We'd go down with several dozen people and go to all their meetings and make our presentations and make our requests, and they would give us their story back of why they couldn't do this, and Mike would explain to them why they could do this, and he would have the Ohio Revised Code in his hand and be citing chapter and verse from the Ohio Revised Code of why they could do it, they just don't want to do it. So it was a pretty bombastic experience.
Different times we had funds, and then the next thing you know, we didn't have funds, and then we had approval from OKI, and then we found out that wasn't there was approval, and then there was another kind of approval, and we didn't have the other kind of approval.
Roxanne Qualls, who was the head of the committee, pulled me out into the hallway, and she was there with the president of OKI, and she said, "Dave, what do you want? I mean, what are you guys down here messing around with us for?" And I explained to her, we just want to have our interchange approved. So she said, "Dave, if we approve your interchange, do you promise you'll never come back here?" Sure, Roxanne.
Dave tells the story when literally he went up to the Federal Highway Department to get the final permit. This is the keys to cut that fence to go starting to build.
We had done everything we were supposed to do. Everything was in place, except for we needed to have this piece of paper. Went to Dick Alderson, who was then a township trustee, and he told me to go to Washington, D.C., find the guy who had the paper and get it from him and bring it back. So I did. 15 minutes before quitting time on a Friday afternoon, he shows up to get his stuff because he's going to go home. And I kind of intersected him in the hallway. He invited me into his cubicle. I explained to him what I wanted. He was eating a sandwich or a candy bar or something with one hand. And he just kind of looked at me and he said, "Yeah, I think I remember that." Reached with his right hand into this 4 or 5 foot tall stack of papers like a robot and pulled out this file folder and opened it up, and he said, "Yeah, here it is," and pulled an ink pen out and he signed it and handed it to me. So I had this piece of paper that we needed to get the interchange approved, or we'd have to wait for 6 years.
He came back with it in his hand. I mean, that's the kind of thing that we did, and then we built it faster than any of them have ever been built by using some creativity, by incentiving the contractor, giving him money if he made bonus money if he finished it within the one construction year, and penalties if he didn't.
Construction of the Union Center Boulevard I-75 interchange began in March of 1997, and unbelievably, it opened for traffic in November, just 8 months later.
Instead of doing all of the steps that you have to do and getting all the approvals that you have to do in the typical manner, which is linearly. You do A, when you get A successfully completed, then you do B. When you get B successfully completed, you do C, all the way through about 20 items. We said, gee, that's going to take way too long. Let's do all of them at the same time.
Chris Wannenberg came to me and said, hey, Charlie, we've got to get a deed to the state for the ramps. They're pouring the bridge abutment already. So things were moving that fast.
One of the things that we were able to do is the way we maintained traffic was exit cars on the ramps and maintain traffic on 75 all the time.
Somebody was smart enough to figure out, well, let's build the ramps first, and during the night, the traffic would go in the ramps and run the ramps. It's the first time in the United States that had happened.
ODOT wanted their typical vandal fence was a chain link fence, that we didn't want that view in this project. We wanted something up class, and that's where we went to the different railing and special paint.
One thing that really amazed us is how wide these roads were and how big they were, because we hadn't had a road this big in Westchester Township before. And one of the things I remember saying is, we'll never fill this up.
We were designing these 4-lane roads out in the middle of a cornfield, which today people say, well, gee, why didn't you build bigger roads? At the time, there was zero traffic. There was no interchange and there was no traffic. And our projections was the roads we built would be good for 20 years.
Costing $29 million, this project was expected to move 30,000 cars daily. The amount of vehicles traveling on Union Center has gone from 5,000 a day the first year to moving more than 50,000 today. A prime interstate location with thousands of acres of land available for development and a dream for what it could become was realized when the ribbon was cut on the Union Center Bridge. To those who held the vision, it was simple determination and perseverance. They made it happen, choosing to ignore those who said it couldn't be done. All of us who live or work here enjoy the benefits of the Union Center interchange, and we thank those involved for forging the path for today's success and tomorrow's continued growth.